Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Office Hours. This is episode number 42, which is, I'm sure, significant in some way, but I'll be damned if I can figure out what it is. My name is Adam Coble, and I'm going to answer some questions about game mastering today. That's what Office Hours is all about. If you've never been here before, welcome. Welcome to my fake library background. Yes, that's right. It's not real. Here's another surprise. I might not be wearing pants. So how does Office Hours work? Well, sometime in the past, 3 brave venturers gathered forth to ask questions of me. And lo, they did so via my website at www.adam-coble.com. They didst click upon the Office Hours link and didst each one in turn fill out the form, and didst then submit the form. And I, sage to their adventurers, whilst now answer those questions. And that's how it works. That's what we do every week here on the Office Hours. So the first question comes to us from Eldritch Architect. Eldritch Architect has a question about intervals.
Hey Adam, I have one of those Chiti 2-part questions for you today, so sorry in advance. As a GM, the largest issue I've run into with my players isn't specifically anything in the game itself. It's time, or free time specifically. I don't have enough of it, my players don't have enough of it, and the free time that each of us does have doesn't often overlap with the availability of others. I know the simple solution here, of course, is to schedule better, but that has been done as best as possible, and I'm more interested in what I can do as a GM in-game to work around the large gaps between sessions, rather than as just a schedule planner. Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 ways to solve this problem. An episodic format with a continuing story where each session has an enjoyable conclusion, or a series of one-shots. However, the prospect of one-shots has always intimidated me. Fitting enough world-building and opportunities for character development into a limited amount of time with a complete story arc seems tremendously difficult. The episodic continuous story format suffers from the same problem, as each session needs to be concluded satisfactorily. These are only 2 ideas, however, and I would welcome any other suggestions for dealing with this issue. So, my question is twofold. How, through my position as a GM, can I work around the long intervals between game sessions to create an engaging role-playing experience? And how can I GM one-shots and other stories with more or less complete plot arcs within a single session, such that sessions will be enjoyable and not feel rushed? Thanks.
All right, Eldritch Architect. Now, I think that you've kind of answered your own question. We've talked about games before in which the players are not able to commit to regular weekly sessions. We've talked a little bit about when you have this situation in which players show up intermittently, but we haven't really talked much about playing regularly with long intervals between sessions, which is why I think the question is worth looking into. I think that some games are better suited to long breaks, but I think no matter what game you're playing, momentum is always a problem. Unless, as you mentioned, you're going to try to break the game up. So let's talk about that a little. Let's talk about those options, because I think, you're sort of dismissive of these answers that you gave. You said, I want to do it this way or that way, but, give me another option, and I will. But I think it's worth looking into the one-shot and the episodic style of play as a solution to this problem. I think you're on the right track. Certainly it's what I would do. So what you're really referring to when you talk about, do I do a series of one-shots or do I do episodic content that kind of has a beginning, middle, and end in every episode, you're referring to structures that are the same in a lot of ways. They're 2 sides of the same coin. And, as you said, you can just switch to running self-contained one-shots. This is the sort of film festival approach to games in which each session is a full game worth of its own thing. You can also run a series of episodic games, which is really the same thing, but you're restraining yourself to the same system and maybe one or more sets of characters and situations, but mostly even episodic content contains the same characters. It's just with a longer break in between and some structuring differences. But let's talk about the advantages of either approach. Of these two options, I think the easiest one for a GM, because you're asking specifically what you can do as a GM, the easiest one to pull off is a series of episodes in the same setting, system, characters, whatever. You can see me doing this on roleplay, generally, because sometimes we go long periods between play, but you can also see it more intentionally with masks on roleplay. So with masks, we intentionally do it as episodic content. We've only done 2 sessions so far, but we'll definitely return to the same characters and separate those sessions by time. And we're playing a game in which episodic content is acceptable, if not outright expected, from both the mechanisms of the game and the source material, right? I could conceivably run that game once every 4 months forever without really losing much from the structure. Comic books are by nature released that way. We expect graphic novels, right? The main advantage, I think, of doing things this way is that you don't have to learn a new system every time you want to roleplay with your friends. I can't understate that here. It's important that I point out that if you do episodic content, it's like a regular game. You don't have to keep learning new rules. And that, for me, even with time in between sessions, is a huge weight off my shoulders. I think that any group and any game getting paired up for the first time is very much like a first date, right? You're playing a new game with a group of people, and it's probably going to be exciting, and it's probably going to be awkward, and you're going to wish you did at least a few things differently in that first session. And with an episodic game, you're looking to have a string of dates. You're planning on a second date. You're planning on a third date in which you can learn the intricacies of the system, even if those dates are taking place weeks or months apart. You're building system familiarity and mastery as a group, but it's happening over a larger period of time. Now, you have to be careful here because you have to ensure, as a game master, that everyone is learning the rules. And I say this a little bit facetiously because it's not really your job, right? It's your player's job to learn the rules, and if they don't, then they're bad and you should not play with them. But you have to be careful that the players are actually learning things as they go. Encourage looking at the rule book between sessions. Encourage brushing up on the rules before the game. Remind everyone, if you're willing to be this active, and say, hey, y'all, we got a game coming up on Thursday. We haven't played since last month. Maybe everybody just do a quick check of the rules. Make sure you remember how things work, because when you're already limited on time, you're already pressed to get as much done as you can in a session, which sounds to me like, when you ask this question, is your main anxiety. You're not going to want to have to go over again exactly how sneak attack works. The rogue should remember how sneak attack works. That's how that goes, right? The danger of doing this approach, of the episodic content approach, is forgetting. And I don't mean just the rules. I mean like what happened in the last session or a session 3 months ago. Because with even doing episodic content like this, you need to stay true to what came before. Canon and continuity is important. Now, I mean, if you're doing sort of a sitcom approach where everything returns to normal at the end and you could ostensibly play these episodes in any order, fine. Don't worry. Character progression is irrelevant then. Don't even use experience if that's your plan. You can do that, and there are games that do that, and we'll talk about that. But canon and continuity is important, even if there are episode breaks in between, because imagine an example. If you're watching Buffy live and they went on a 3-month hiatus, and Kendra came back and her Jamaican accent is suddenly an Irish accent, you'd notice, right? You'd remember and you'd notice. You want your players to respect canon and continuity in the way that you do, even with that time gap. And so I think that taking good notes and encouraging your players to do the same is super important if you're going to do it this way. Now, you know that I'm not that into the idea of immersion as the main reason we play role-playing games, but I do think that continuity and forward momentum adds believability, and it allows you to rely on the world to be the same from episode to episode. And the players are responsible for this as much as you are. Don't let them shirk their responsibility. Think about recording your sessions. Even just turning on your phone and recording the audio of the session so you can go over later and take notes, because sometimes taking notes at the table is hard, or the notes that you take don't make sense and you need context for them. This can help you draw out the little details and remember what happened. Externalizing your memory gives you a chance to repurpose and reintegrate that action as you move from session to session. And I think that with all forms of role play, you're going to want to pick a game that does episodic content well, because some do and some don't, right? So look for a game with structure, mechanical structure, that you can attach a session's start, middle, and end to. I don't know, maybe you can think of a few already, but my favorites are Torchbearer, Mouse Guard, Blades in the Dark, Dogs in the Vineyard, Sagas of the Icelanders, Undying. All these games have fictional and mechanical turns in some way or another that can make a start and end to the session matter in the rules, right? It'll help you as a GM tie things up neatly. Undying is particularly cool here because you can really fuck around with time. Each session in Undying, you play vampires. And as vampires, you're immortal and you live forever unless you're, killed by a angry young high school student and her idiot friends. But the idea with Undying is that you get a vignette of larger timeline moments. You get bits and pieces of a timeline of these immortal lives where you focus in. Episode 1 might be set in 500 BC, then you might do one in 10 AD, then 200 AD, then 1200, etc., until you're done playing. And as a group, you get to explore all these times and places as you go. It feels really cool, and the players tend to attach themselves to the Roman episode or the 80s episode, right? You get these, much like a TV show, you get these things where not only are you like that episode where, Lord Vainglorious got killed by the vampire hunters, but that happened in the 1850s. So we remember, Lord Vainglorious and the way he dressed and where the game was set during that time. So it's really easy to signpost that stuff. And a season of a game could be 12 episodes, each in its own timeline. So Undying is a really cool example of that. But if you're not feeling vampires as a thing, I'm going to suggest a game called Primetime Adventures. Primetime Adventures is cool for a lot of different reasons. And for a while, Primetime Adventures was the Apocalypse World of the game design community. It was Apocalypse World before Apocalypse World was, in that a lot of people were using it as a base to imagine new games built on it. In certain small communities online, as go, indie RPGs. Primetime Adventures is literally straight up designed to create a TV show. Ergo, every episode, every session is built to be episodic. Primetime Adventures. It's a show-based, kind of TV-oriented role-playing game. Good for episodic content. Surprising, I think, nobody. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in a game that's going to support you in that regard. And what feels important to me about doing an episodic game like this is that you've got a kicker at the beginning, you've got rising action, you've got a climax and a denouement. You've got a narrative arc, whether you're playing for 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours, whatever. You want to feel like there's this arc to it. And if your game isn't set on helping you do that, you're doing more work than you need to, right? Like, yes, okay, you can play other games that don't mechanically support episodic content, but you have to look at the narrative and you have to do work around understanding the game and making the game do that. You can play D&D as a series of self-contained one-shots, but good luck at higher levels when combat takes 2 whole hours, or 4, if you're like some of my players. I think the thing is pick the right game, right? Start there. Pick the right game and figure out how to make it work for this type of content, and then maintain continuity from episode to episode. Turn that authority over to your players to remember that stuff too. Torchbearer and Mouse Guard both have recap mechanics. That stuff is great. Incentivize your players to remember that shit. Now, your other suggestion, trying to play a series of disconnected one-shots, that's tricky too, because you give up on continuity and having to deal with all that stuff, which is great. But on the other hand, you have to do all the same work as an episodic style game, but you have to switch systems and situations every damn time. Now, if you're the kind of player who likes learning new systems and likes coming up with brand new situations, great, do it. Cool, you do this instead. But it puts so much work on you as GM, as facilitator, and takes a lot of work off the shoulders of your players, because most of the time folks aren't going to come to the table for a one-shot having learned the rules. So with one-shots, pick a game that works well for this structure, like before, something that can either be learned quickly or relies on very little rules knowledge overall, right? Or go all the way and share the GMing work among the group. Microscope, Fiasco, Tenor Bancho Zero, depending on how you play it, award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World can be good for this. Just off the top of my head, there are a lot of games that are designed for or designed with one-shots in mind. Again, small press, indie, tabletop role-playing games are all about this because, well, a lot of cultural reasons, but because they tend to rely on players taking a risk with a new game they've never played, and a one-shot is a good way to do that. And they get a lot of press at conventions, in which people usually play one, 2 to 4 hour session. So they're designed for this kind of thing. If you find a few that you like, you can rotate through them, right? Do a Fiasco game, do a Microscope game, play Tenor Bancho, go back to Microscope, play Fiasco. This way you keep playing with the same group or a similar looking group, and you're doing a new thing every week, but you're still having fun with the system that you like. One-shots benefit from not needing the same players every time, so if you miss someone, say Saeed can't make this episode, but everybody else can, it's fine. You can still play that. You can do that with episodic content, right? Like, not every character is in every episode, but generally speaking, Xander, Willow, Buffy, Giles, and sometimes Cordelia were in most of the episodes for a given season, right? I think that something you can do with your group is extend the amount of time you spend playing together, if it's possible, right? Not in the more sessions per month sense, because that's the problem you're having now, but in the more hours per session sense. Have a game day where you play for 8 hours, right? Play for 4 hours, take a break, play for 4 hours. Make a whole day of it, right? Saturday, third Saturday of every month is game day. We play games together. It's a given, right? It can give you so much more room as a game master to craft a narrative if you're able to swing that much time. Now, that's hard. That's very hard to do because it's also a lot more fatiguing. Speaking as someone who has done several 8-hour one-shots or episodes of things, it has to suit the game. It has to suit your style of play, and your players all have to be able to engage for that long. So it's tricky. But if you're only playing once a month, don't you want to get the most out of it? Consider it as a suggestion. I think the other thing, and this is going to be my answer to your, well, what else can I do question? And I'm gonna hit you in the philosophy here. Reorient your brain. Give up on the neat little storyline feeling that you want so bad. Right? The Buddha teaches us that existence is suffering. What you desire is killing you. Let it go. Let it go. Right? Because as the GM, look, it's often your unstated, assumed, whatever, presumptive job to make sure that shit wraps up all nicely and you frame and pace the scenes of the game to make it work, right? You and your players probably expect like a big climax at the end, but you're not responsible for that. Everyone is. Or nobody is, right? Try playing a one-shot that just ends. Try playing a game where you're like, cool, all right, it's 6 o'clock, we're in the middle of a fight. Thanks for playing, everybody. Try letting an episode end without any clear finale. We expect and hope for these little narrative objects that are precious and perfect and satisfying, and we want to go home thinking like, yeah, I got everything I wanted out of that, and it started and stopped and it did a thing, and man, what a nice, neat little package. But you force yourself to constrain your storytelling when you do that, and maybe try just having an unsatisfying ending. Just look at the time that you got to play with your friends as being valued in and of itself. It's a weird experiment, but maybe you'll enjoy it. Maybe it'll free you up from that bullshit sense. Ultimately, you're either going to learn to love the way you have to play with these people, or you're going to find new people who play better. And by that, I mean whose schedule fits your own, right? Either way, whatever happens, I hope that you get the support that you need from your fellow players and that you get to play the game that you want. whatever shape that takes. Practical questions are often the hardest ones to answer, but I think you're on the way.
Hey Adam, my name is Ryan, and this question you may have already answered. I just happened upon office hours from seeing what else you get up to after watching the Waypoint session you did with those folks a couple of weeks ago. So I run 5th edition D&D, and I was wondering what tips you have for handling player character death. I brought this up with my players because we play our game on Twitch, and at one point I thought it would be a good idea to come up with a contingency plan for what happens if their characters should die. One of my players took issue with this, saying, if my character dies, we'll go to hell and it'll get a soul back and it'll be fine. To which I responded, I'm not really open to that narratively. You guys can go talk to a cleric and roll some dice, but if there's no risk and no danger, what are we really playing for? His only response was, if I don't get to play my character anymore, I'll be upset. We haven't really talked about it since. Am I in the wrong for wanting death to mean something, or should I just bend to my players' want and use death as an adventure hook? Thanks for making a bunch of cool stuff. I need to go watch.
Hello, Ryan. This is a great question because you both fucked up. I don't mean that in like a I'm judging you way. It sounds real judgy, but you both fucked this up. Because you both want the same thing. You're just not seeing eye to eye on this. So what's interesting here is you want death to mean something in your game. And your player wants death to mean something in the game. You just want different things. But you didn't talk about that. This is like that awkward conversation where someone was like, this is just classic like bad relationship communication. What's happening here isn't the player wanting death to be meaningless, and it's not you being mean and wanting it to be punitive. It's a fundamental misalignment of expectations when the HP gauge hits 0, right? When we get to this point, you and me, player and GM, when we get here and I die, I want to know that what's going to happen isn't going to be shitty for me as a person. I'm not going to have a hard time continuing to play after that. And you want the rules to matter, and you want the players to suffer in the sense that, like, when you die, you have made a mistake. You should not allow yourself to die, and you should have to work back from that. This fundamental misalignment, thankfully, has something that we can look to fix it. What do we do when two players want different things in a narrative, right? When we're playing a role-playing game and I assert something and you assert the opposite. When I say, I kill the guard, and you say, the guard kills you. What do we do in a role-playing game when those things happen? We use the rules. We use the rules of the game. We look at the book on the table or the PDF on the screen that we are using to play this game together, the interpreting of which we decide as a group to agree to, and we just fucking play the game. Now, in 5e, in D&D, when you die, the core book gives you rules for what happens. When you hit 0 HP, you start making death saves. When you run out of death saves, you are dead. There are spells that can fix you. That's how it works. There's nothing hard and fast in the player's handbook about, like, going to hell and recovering your soul. Also, like, real talk, if I had a friend who died and their soul went to hell, I would probably rethink that friendship, right? Bad people go to hell. You stay there with your new friends in hell where you belong. But when you all sat down to play the game, you agreed to the rules that the game gave you about what happened for dying. But this conversation happened before that agreement. This conversation was about that agreement. This was the player saying, I don't want to do it this way, right? You expressly said, your player said, I'm going to be upset. I'm going to feel bad as a person. I'm going to have a negative emotional response if I'm not able to play my character. What I am asking you for, which they never really did, what I'm asking you for as a player is, can we have an alternative solution? Can there be another way so that I can suffer from having died, but still get to play my character in the future? I do not want to lose the things that I have sunk into this game. Time, energy, emotional content. I don't want to have to give that stuff up. You suggested a contingency plan for the campaign, your player offered a counter plan, and then what? right? Nothing. You just said to your player, no, too bad. That's not happening. Now, I'm assuming that this isn't a two-player game, because if you're playing two-player 5e, you have bigger problems than this. But your other players were involved, and I can't help but wonder what they had to say. But either way, it sounds like you both didn't listen to each other. Your player was asking you for something here, though because of lots of potential reasons, one of which being traditionally in this situation, a player is easily disregarded, right? The GM in this situation, I think a lot of traditional game masters would say to you, no, you're right. Well, fuck that baby. They're not allowed to complain. When you die, you die. Those are the rules. You're the game master. But your player didn't ask you this as a character. Your player asked you this as a person. When a player says to me, if this happens, I'm going to be really sad and I'm going to have a bad time, I try to listen because I care more about my friends having fun than I do about the rules. I know, gasp, right? I love rules in role-playing games, not in real life. I love them. They create structure for games. They help us resolve problems. They're there for a reason. But if someone says to me, I do not want this in my game, I try to listen to them and take them seriously and work out a solution as best I can. And sometimes if I'm smart, I can work this out in advance with my players. Now, sometimes I have to wing it. For example, in a recent game of D&D, we're playing through an adventure with some semi-permanent characters. It's sort of a one-off adventure, right? When we finish the adventure, we're done with the characters for now. And it would be a huge waste of time and a total derailment of the game to have a dead PC have to get replaced with a whole new character right in the middle of things and bring them into the adventure. Narratively, we couldn't just leave the adventure and go questing for their soul either. So when the inevitable death did occur, we looked at the Dungeon Master's Guide for some alternate rules. We decided as a group how to handle it. We hacked the game and we moved on. And what I tried to do here was step back from my authority as the GM and let the group as a whole decide based on some decisions we'd already made. Sticking to the adventure, playing at this level, yada, yada, yada. The thing here is that you saying, I'm not into that narratively, and them saying, I don't want to play a different character, need to interact at the social level and both be taken seriously. You need to find a way to not step on each other's toes, because you're going to have a bad time if death doesn't mean anything in your campaign. But the thing is, you're still playing a game, and the rules matter, and you have to agree on a rule, and once you have, you stick to it. And I get what you mean about death having consequences. It's a big part of 5e, and you can lose at 5th edition, and generally when you lose, it's because you failed and died. There should be some kind of punitive action, but you don't want to punish the player and make them not have fun anymore. That's not what this is about. D&D is not about hurting players for making mistakes. It's about making them make up for their mistakes. It's about countering them with further effort and learning the game. The thing here is that we all consent to the rules of play before we get into a game, and it doesn't sound like your player was giving consent here. It sounds like your player was saying, if you do this, I'm going to be upset, and then neither of you were able to continue that conversation in a helpful way. Now, I'm not saying that everyone just gets what they want because they said so, right? I'm not saying that a player can say, well, I'm going to feel sad if I don't get 10 times more experience than everyone else. That's bullshit. People shouldn't use their emotions to manipulate piddly crap like that. We have to play with people in good faith. We have to trust that they are telling us about their feelings because they matter. And like, yeah, get over it. Like, there are some things in which your players need to, as a group, and you, recognize your feelings. You're going to get salty if something doesn't go your way. This happens to everybody, right? It's fine. It's fine to get salty. But live with it. Live with that salt. There's a difference between feeling salty because you died and having your fun ruined because you died. Now, I think the answer here might be, if the two of you can't come to an accord, is that this player should play with a different game master. Maybe the two of you just don't fit together. You want to know this before you play. You want to know this between sessions. Don't let this happen in the middle of a game. Do not be that person with the story about how the player stormed out because you had a big argument at the table. That is awkward as hell. You've got an audience too. If you're playing this on Twitch, Jesus God, do not let that happen on screen. That is embarrassing as hell. It sounds like a sticky interaction between system and player desire. Yours to create a world with real consequence. This person's desire to play a character they love. It sounds like they're open to alternate consequences, though, and I think if you're willing to look a little deeper into the issue, you can find something that fits for both of you. And I hope you have a chance to sit down together and work this out. And I hope that you include the rest of your gaming group in that conversation, and that it makes all of you better at communicating this stuff. The rules are a great place to start, and they absolutely matter, but all RPG players have the potential inside of them to be a designer. So start redesigning your campaign. Redesign death. Make it work for everyone. You can do it. You are not stupid. You are at least as smart, and I don't even know you. You are at least as smart as every person that works at Wizards of the Coast. Just because they got a job making D&D doesn't mean you can't also make D&D. So get out there, work with your group, talk to them, make a better D&D for you. You can do it. You just got to listen, both of you. Just shut up and listen to each other.
Okay, so my DM is setting up side quests for each member of the party to resolve conflicts in their backstory. The downside to this with 6 players is this has drawn out the game to the point where the campaign may never end, and there's no exit points for players or their characters to sort of put them down or change things up a bit. So, how do you resolve elements of the party's backstories without dragging out the game too long?
Backstories. You know I love them. I love it. And you know what? When every player comes to the table with a fucking mighty warhorse of backstory, and they lash one of the GM's limbs to their warhorse, and all the players slap that horse on the butt, and the horses all run in different directions, the game master explodes in a shower of blood, and your game is ruined. Fucking backstory. God damn it. All right. Here's the thing, right? Integration. Integration is the only fucking way to make this work. On 2 levels, the idea of integration is going to save your game from feeling like this bullshit video game, do everybody's side mission for the true ending situation. It's fine for Mass Effect, not good for tabletop. The first level of integration here is player to player. If everyone is coming to the table with their own unique, fancy backstories that are not connected to each other at all in any way, oh, fuck you, don't do that. Share NPCs, share gods, share kingdoms, share factions, share family, be tied to one another. Integrate your backstory. If you're playing D&D, having a backstory and doing quests about it at all isn't playing by the rules. There's nothing in D&D that says that the GM has to give a fuck about your backstory. They don't. You're lucky that they even listen or read it. So what you need to do as players is bust your ass extra hard if you expect the GM and the other players to give a fuck about how you were, I don't know, raised by the crap goblins of the Dong Peninsula, right? Make sure you're not the only one. Tie those goblins, tie that peninsula to the other players. Invite the wizard to be the one who rescued you from the sex mills of the crap goblins. Ask the cleric if she wants to be the one who led the expedition to the Dong Peninsula for the expedition god, and that's how you know each other, right? You, as players, need to do this to make the job of the GM less idiotic and tedious for everyone. Plus, it's super fun. Man, it would sure be cool if somebody invented some kind of fantasy role-playing game where, like, part of character creation was making it so you had to have some kind of connection to the other PCs. Yeah, I would definitely pay some kind of amount of money, like $25. That'd be a steal, $25 for a copy of a game like that. Boy, wouldn't that be great? However, since it sounds like you're playing some kind of inferior fantasy RPG, I'm just going to say to start, you'll need to stop being such special little precious individuals and start playing the team game, backstory-wise. God, there's a shit burning wheel skill. I know all about the tragic backstories of my favorite characters. Cool. You can use that skill to go fork yourself. Anyway, the other part of this where integration has to happen is at the GM level, right? I'm not going to let your GM off the hook here. The GM needs to prep adventures that include content from all of the backstories instead of just chasing one after another. If you have a player who has a backstory about being betrayed by the Lord Sorcerer Wizard Tits McCracken, and another who is drafted into the skeleton army of skeletons, you better damn well make Lord Wizzletits into a general for that army, right? Nice, easy connection there. Because otherwise, you are doing the backstory chase. And then everyone will get bored until it's their turn. And then they're like, yes, it's my backstory time. And it's, don't do that. Integrate. This is so easy as a game master. Here's what you do. Here's what you do as a game master. I'm gonna tell you, you can physically do this. Take the Cheeto-stained dot matrix printout of beautifully crafted backstory that your players have given you. Steal a highlighter from your place of business. Every place of business has highlighters. Steal one. Take it home and highlight all the nouns. Just highlight the nouns. Go through all of that. Put them in a spreadsheet. Now throw away everything else. Yes, everything. Throw away the candle burnt-edged scroll they made from their father. Throw out the sheet music for the Tale of Sir Scandalous. Huck all that crap in the garbage. You don't need it. It's their fault for making it. They shouldn't have. Take that spreadsheet and just mad-lib that shit into an adventure. All right, everybody. Today we are entering the Dungeon of Farts, wherein you will find the treasure of smelly hair. But first you must defeat a massive bong. You're going to take elements of all the various backstories, and because you're a rad GM, you're going to work them together to make a cogent narrative. It's super fun looking for those connections. At least, it is for me. When the players give you a mystery, don't try to solve it yourself. Tie it to someone else's mystery and let them solve it in play. You want to make one character's murdered uncle the victim of another character's vampire nanny so that they'll both have reasons to lose their shit and earn inspiration when you get to the big climax. You want to set them up for inspiring climaxes. It's fun. It's fun because they'll learn that. They'll be like, wait a second, the man in blue? I know a man in blue. We're friends now. We have a thing. There's a human connection between us, or a elf-dwarf connection, or a Kenku slugman connection. Wait, you were raised by crap goblins too? It's a beautiful moment, and if the players don't expect it, you can have some really good moments in game about this. You want your players to be like, wow, you're the best game master ever. How did you do this? And you're just going to be like, Dungeon of Farts, man. I mad-lib that shit. It's easy. You can do it too. I think, here's the thing, right? I'm being really flip and silly about this because it's easy and it's fun, and you don't need big, serious advice to fix this problem. You don't need me to get all emotional and relationship and philosophy on you. This is a fun problem to have. Your players are invested in the world. They're investing in a way that's making the game stupid, and you can unstupid them by repurposing the cool shit that they made. And what's interesting, if y'all were listening, this is not a question from the GM. This is a question from the player about their GM. So, player, email this video link to your game master if you're watching this on YouTube. Or like, I don't know, lean over and smooch him on the mouth for watching it with you live on Twitch right now. And then go play Dungeons and Dragons. Or something else that's better written. This has been today's episode of Dungeon World. I mean, Office Hours. Thanks for coming, everybody. This is episode 42. You can get involved in Office Hours by going to my website at www.adam-koble.com, clicking the Office Hours link, filling out the form, and submitting your question. And I promise, the answer to all of your questions is not Dungeon World. It's a game that I made. It's pretty good, but it is not going to solve all your problems. However, I might be able to. You can submit your questions. We're at a bit of a backlog, as goes these things, but I think that these questions are kind of universal. So, if you've got an urgent question, if your question is, my PC just stabbed me and I'm bleeding to death on the floor of my kitchen, please send help. Do not submit that question to Office Hours. I cannot help you. But if your question is about how to structure your campaign, how to handle your players, how to build a better NPC, that I can help you with. Not an ambulance, just a GM. looking to help out. Thanks for coming, everybody. We will be back, I think, in 2 weeks, because there's a certain game that rhymes with Fursona coming out next week. It's going to interrupt the usual flow, but we'll be back, tweed and all, pants optional, and we'll answer some more questions about game mastering tabletop role-playing games. This has been episode 42 of Office Hours. Thank you so much for coming. I will see you on the flip side.